Amelia remained on her knees in the cold warehouse, her mind racing with dread. The weight of Rachel's ultimatum pressed heavily on her. She could already picture Ben's parents' faces, the look of betrayal, shock, and heartbreak. Yet, she knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. As dawn broke over Lagos, Amelia found herself standing in front of a modest house on a quiet street. The house looked worn but filled with memories, a place that once held warmth and laughter. But her presence here would shatter whatever peace Ben's family had found since his death. Taking a shaky breath, she knocked on the door, her hand trembling. She braced herself for the moment, her heart pounding so loud she could hardly hear the sounds of movement inside. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, and an elderly woman stood before her. It was Ben's mother. Her eyes were gentle, though dulled with grief, as if carrying an invisible weight she had learned to live with over the years. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft, a tone Amelia could hardly bear. Amelia forced herself to meet the woman's gaze, swallowing back the urge to run. "Mrs. Akin," she began, her voice breaking, I'm Amelia, and I need to talk to you about Ben." The woman's expression softened as she heard her son's name. She stepped back, gesturing for Amelia to come in, perhaps hoping Amelia was a friend or someone who knew him in a way that could bring her comfort. But the warmth of her invitation only made Amelia feel colder inside. Amelia stepped into the house, her gaze quickly darting around. Photos of Ben filled the small living room, smiling in graduation robes, laughing with friends, arms around his family. Each picture felt like a blow to her heart, a reminder of the life she had stolen. Mrs. Akin sat down, looking at her expectantly. "So, you knew my son?" Amelia nodded slowly, guilt clawing at her chest. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes downcast. I need to tell you the truth about what happened to him. About the night he died." Mrs. Akin's face froze, and she clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her body tensing. Amelia watched as she braced herself, waiting for answers she had probably never dared to imagine. "It was me, Mrs. Akin," Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. "I was the one who... I was driving that night, and... I hit him. I panicked, and I left him there. I didn't call for help. I didn't even look back." Her voice broke, each word tearing at her soul. "I have no excuse. I was selfish, and I was scared. And I'm so sorry." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mrs. Akin sat perfectly still, her face unreadable, her gaze fixed somewhere far away. Slowly, she brought a trembling hand to her mouth, her shoulders beginning to shake. Amelia felt the shame and regret wash over her, but it was nothing compared to the agony in the woman before her. Finally, Mrs. Akin spoke, her voice so soft it was barely a whisper. "For years, I thought he had been alone that night. I prayed someone had been there for him, even a stranger. But to know he was left there, by someone who could have helped," her words trailed off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Amelia lowered her head, unable to meet her gaze. "I'll never forgive myself. I know nothing I say can undo it, but I'm here to accept whatever you want to do. If you want to press charges, or if you need anything, I'll do it." Mrs. Akin took a shaky breath, then lifted her head, her face a mixture of pain and sorrow. "I'm too tired for anger, Amelia. I lost my son that night, and nothing will bring him back." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "But I hope that someday, you feel the weight of what you took from us, and carry it." Amelia nodded, the finality of those words settling into her soul. She had come seeking forgiveness, but she realized now that forgiveness was not something she could ask for, it was something she would have to earn, one step at a time, with the weight of her guilt as her only companion. As she turned to leave, Mrs. Akin's voice stopped her. "I don't hate you, Amelia. But I will never understand how you could have left him. And I hope you spend every day of your life wondering how you might make amends." Amelia walked out, feeling as though she had left part of her soul in that living room. But as she stepped into the sunlight, the burden of her guilt felt clearer, sharper. It would haunt her, but perhaps now she had the chance to live a life that honored the one she had taken. She would never be free of her guilt, and she didn't want to be. She would carry it, step by step, hoping that maybe, one day, she could find a way to atone. As Amelia walked away from the house, the sunlight felt harsh, almost judgmental. Each step felt like walking on shards of glass, every thought a reminder of the irreparable harm she had caused. But there was a quiet resolve within her now. She had faced Ben's mother, admitted the truth, and felt the weight of her words. This was only the beginning, she knew, of a long journey towards some form of redemption. In the days that followed, Amelia found herself replaying her conversation with Mrs. Akin over and over. She would lie awake at night, haunted by Mrs. Akin's tearful face and the distant, pained look in her eyes. She couldn't escape the memory of that house, the photographs, the life she had ended, and the family she had broken. But perhaps she could take that pain and channel it into something meaningful. Driven by a need to make a difference, she began volunteering at a local hospital, specifically in the trauma ward where victims of accidents were treated. She wanted to understand their pain, to see firsthand the lives that were torn apart by moments of carelessness, much like hers. Her work was hard and often heartbreaking, but each patient's story fueled her desire to help others in any way she could. One day, while on her shift, Amelia found herself caring for a young man who reminded her painfully of Ben. He was in his early 20s, with a gentle smile and a warmth that made her heart ache. His name was Daniel, and he had survived the car accident that had left him badly injured. His family visited him often, surrounding him with love and laughter, and Amelia couldn't help but think of Ben and the life he never had the chance to live. As she spent time with Daniel, they began to talk, and he would often share stories of his own dreams and hopes. Listening to him, Amelia felt a strange mix of joy and sorrow. She felt honored to be a part of his recovery, but the thought of Ben's unfulfilled future haunted her. One evening, as she helped Daniel through a painful round of physical therapy, he looked at her, sensing her sadness. "You know, you don't have to carry the whole world on your shoulders," he said gently. "Whatever it is, you're here now, making a difference." His words struck her deeply. She hadn't told anyone at the hospital her story, yet somehow, Daniel seemed to sense her pain. She forced a small smile. "Thank you, Daniel. But some things, they just stay with you." He nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "I get that. But maybe those things are supposed to shape us, not break us." Amelia left the hospital that night with a newfound sense of purpose. Maybe her journey was less about seeking forgiveness and more about making every moment count for something. She couldn't undo the past, but she could honor Ben's memory in how she moved forward. Weeks turned into months, and Amelia continued her work at the hospital, dedicating herself fully. Each life she touched, each person she helped, was a small step toward healing. She knew she would carry her guilt forever, but now it felt like a source of strength, a reminder of the life she had taken and the lives she could still help. But late one evening, as she was leaving the hospital, she saw a figure waiting for her by the entrance. Her heart stopped as she recognized Rachel, Ben's sister, standing there, watching her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a faint flicker of curiosity, or perhaps a truce, in her gaze. Amelia approached slowly, unsure of what to expect. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" Rachel looked at her, her eyes searching. "I heard you've been volunteering here. Helping people." Amelia nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm trying. It doesn't erase what I did, but I thought it was the least I could do." For a long moment, Rachel was silent. Then she took a step closer, her voice softer than Amelia had ever heard it. I still don't forgive you, Amelia. But maybe you can make something good out of what's left. Amelia felt tears well up, and she nodded, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you, Rachel. I won't waste this chance. I promise. Rachel didn't respond, but as she turned and walked away into the night, Amelia felt a glimmer of hope, like a small light in the darkness. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt she was on her way to becoming someone worthy of the second chance she'd been given. As she walked back into the hospital, she knew her journey was far from over, but she felt a quiet strength within her. She would carry Ben's memory with her, letting it guide her, reminding her to live each day with purpose, compassion, and a promise to never look away from the lives around her. Amelia felt a quiet peace settle over her as she re-entered the hospital. For the first time, she felt like she had taken a real step forward, a step toward honoring Ben's memory in a way that might actually make a difference. Every day, she poured herself into her work, feeling the slow, steady healing that came from helping others, from witnessing their struggles and triumphs. Months passed, and Amelia's life found a rhythm. She spent most of her days at the hospital and her evenings studying to become a trauma counselor. She wanted to be able to offer more, to not only help patients physically but to help them navigate the emotional turmoil that followed traumatic events. Her studies gave her a sense of purpose, something she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, a young woman was admitted to the hospital after a hit-and-run accident. Amelia's heart sank as she watched the woman's family huddle together in the waiting room, faces etched with worry and fear. It was a painful reminder of her own past, a mirror of what she had caused in Ben's family. Amelia offered comfort to the family, sitting with them, holding their hands, and speaking words of reassurance. The young woman, Olivia, had suffered severe injuries but was stable. Over the next few weeks, Amelia spent time by Olivia's bedside, watching her slowly regain strength. She saw Olivia's family visit, offering support and encouragement, and it filled Amelia with both sorrow and determination. She knew she could never bring Ben back, but helping Olivia felt like a small way to make things right. As Olivia grew stronger, she began to share her story with Amelia, her hopes, her dreams, and her plans for the future. She was studying to become a journalist and dreamed of traveling across Africa, telling stories of people who often went unheard. Listening to her, Amelia felt inspired. There was a strength in Olivia that reminded her of Ben, a zest for life that had been taken from him too soon. One evening, as they talked, Olivia turned to Amelia with a question that caught her off guard. Why do you do this, Amelia? You're here every day, helping people, but I see a sadness in your eyes. What happened? Amelia felt her heart clench. She had kept her past buried deep, never sharing the full story with anyone. But something about Olivia's gentle curiosity made her feel safe. After a pause, she decided to tell her the truth. I once made a terrible mistake, Amelia began, her voice trembling. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I ran from it, but eventually, I realized that running only made it worse. I came here because I needed to make up for what I did, in any way I could. Olivia listened silently, her eyes filled with understanding. When Amelia finished, she reached out, taking her hand. We can't change the past, but we can choose what we do with it. You're here, making a difference every day. That's powerful. Amelia felt a surge of gratitude, a warmth that seemed to fill the empty spaces within her. Olivia's words settled over her like a bomb, a reminder that while she could never undo her mistakes, she could find meaning in the life she had left. As time went on, Amelia began to see her work in a new light. Each person she helped was a way of honoring Ben, a way of giving back to the world that she had once taken from. And though the guilt never fully left her, it became something she could live with, a weight she could bear with purpose and strength. One night, as she was leaving the hospital, she noticed a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. It was Mrs. Akin, Ben's mother. Her heart raced as she approached, unsure of what to expect. "Mrs. Akin," she greeted softly, her voice full of respect. The older woman looked at her with an expression that was softer than Amelia had expected. "I heard from Rachel that you've been doing good work here," she said, her voice filled with both sorrow and pride. Ben would have wanted that. Amelia felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes welling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to speak. "I'll keep working to make him proud." Mrs. Akin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I may never fully forgive you, Amelia, but I can see that you're trying to change. And that counts for something." As Mrs. Akin turned to leave, Amelia felt a sense of closure that had eluded her for so long. She knew that her journey wasn't over, that she would carry her guilt and sorrow for the rest of her life. But she also knew she had found a way to live with it, to channel it into something that brought light instead of darkness. Amelia watched as Mrs. Akin disappeared into the night, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue her work, continue helping others, and continue living a life that honored the memory of the person she had lost. In that moment, Amelia knew she would never stop trying to make things right. And for the first time in years, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she was on the path to redemption.